Kamala Harris and Donald Trump met on stage for 90 minutes last night for their one and maybe only debate of the presidential campaign. 57.5 million Americans tuned in across 7 television networks. And here are some of the highlights.
Kamala Harris, let's have a good debate.
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people. So let's be clear about that. And clearly he is having a very difficult time processing that. This is someone who has openly said he would terminate, I'm quoting, terminate the Constitution of the United States, that he would weaponize the Department of Justice.
This is the one that weaponized, not me. She weaponized. I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me. We have millions of people pouring into our country from prisons and jails, from mental institutions and insane asylums. Now she wants to do transgender operations on illegal aliens that are in prison. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets.
You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom.
People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. So she can't talk about that. People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics. They sent her to negotiate peace before this war started. 3 days later, he went in and he started the war because everything they said was weak and stupid.
Why don't you tell the 800,000 Polish Americans right here in Pennsylvania how quickly you would give up for the sake of favor and what you think is a friendship with what is known to be a dictator who would eat you for lunch.
They respect me. They don't respect Biden. How would you respect him? Why? For what reason?
It's important to remind the former president you're not running against Joe Biden, you're running against me.
She has a plan to confiscate everybody's gun.
Tim Walz and I are both gun owners. We're not taking anybody's guns away, so stop with the continuous lying about this stuff.
She's going to do this, she's going to do that, she's going to do all these wonderful things. Why hasn't she done it? She's been there for 3.5 years.
Donald Trump certainly should not be telling a woman what to do with her body.
But her vice presidential pick says abortion in the 9th month is absolutely fine. He also says execution after birth. It's execution, no longer abortion, because the baby is born, is okay.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born.
When Congress passes a bill to put back in place the protections of Roe v. Wade, as President of the United States, I will proudly sign it into law. That's the kind of president we need right now. Someone who cares about you and is not putting themselves first.
And they're destroying our country. The worst president, the worst vice president in the history of our country.
Okay, that's a lot, but that's just a short taste of that high-stakes debate. Now we're going to hear analysis from both sides of this race. Democratic political strategist Antoine Seawright joins me now. Antoine, good to see you again. Thanks for joining us 2 days in a row.
Happy post-debate day.
Well, I was going to say happy post-debate day for Democrats this time. After the last debate, when I talked to Democrats, it was despair, it was anxiety, it was sadness. How are you feeling today?
Well, welcome to being a Democrat. We have our highs, we have our mids, and we have our lows. But last night was a display of Kamala Harris's best. She showed the versatility of her as a candidate. She showed her intellectual capacity, but she also demonstrated to the country the contrast in this election and what the two choices are. Her ability to not only frame the election, frame her opponent, but also frame the future, and I think put a button on her record was very impressive when you compare that to the former president who could not articulate a policy agenda or a policy prescription for the ills and chills of this country, not to mention he was forced to pivot to his traditional right-wing, toned-down racial rhetoric because he could not articulate a policy agenda, and personality politics is what has gotten him here. But I think personality politics will be the thing that will dismiss him from the presidency.
I want to touch on what you said there about framing her opponent, because a lot of the analysis going into this was she needed to offer some specifics. You know, the vice president needed to show that she could be presidential. She seemed to go in there with the intention of eviscerating and disqualifying Donald Trump by baiting him into revealing his worst qualities as often as possible for as long as possible, and it worked.
Well, I think she just exposed the vulnerabilities of Donald Trump, and she exposed what we all know about him, is that he is an accidental nominee. There's no way anyone in the Republican Party or any Trump supporter can say they support the former president because of policy. Most people cannot articulate what his policy agenda is. If you ask him, as asked last night, what's his health care policy? He does not have one. He was asked several times on the debate stage, why did you kill the immigration reform legislation, bipartisan, etc.? He did not have an answer. He calls drill, baby, drill, big, bold, beautiful healthcare plan. He indicates that as policy. So she exposed the vulnerabilities and the dangers of Donald Trump. So I wouldn't call it baiting him. I would call it exposing him.
Right. Well, he failed to keep the discipline I think people wanted him to keep on the Republican side of this. But, you know, you say people can't possibly support him for his policies, yet there are a lot of Americans out there who cite policy when they say they support Donald Trump. They say the economy was better under him, cost of living was better under him. So, I mean, pundits, media, political strategists, they all have their take on on this debate. What do you think the impact is in the election? How do you think voters are going to react to what they saw last night?
Oh, I think by and large, a lot of people are still getting to know Kamala Harris. And if last night was the only debate they had, and that was going to be the driving force of how they show their support in this election, then hands down she will win. But we know that's not true, because we've seen presidential debates before when one candidate loses the debate but ultimately wins the election. Most people can pinpoint back to the 2016 election when there was no argument. Hillary Clinton won the first debate, but she did not end the election. That's why I think the high-tech, high-touch strategy of a campaign and what happens after the debate is perhaps just as important as the debate. Thankfully, Democrats raised somewhere north of $20 million last night. It's going to help continue to expand and build the infrastructure, communicate with voters. But also, I think Kamala Harris continued to introduce herself to the American people, whether it's rallies, whether it's events, whether it's on Zooms. However she shows up is going to be important because people are still getting to know her. The cake is already baked about the former president.
She certainly introduced herself in the debate as capable, as confident, you know, as not intimidated by the former president. But she also introduced herself to Donald Trump and went up to him and shook his hand as they were coming up to the podiums, which was an interesting maneuver because they'd never met each other before. Why do you think she did that? What do you think the value of that move was?
Because Donald Trump and his extremist compadres, if you will, or friends have been intentional about mispronouncing her name for the sake of galvanizing, energizing the base. And so she wanted to be certain that he knew her name, but also knew that she did not fear him. A lot of what Trump does and a lot of the pathways he operates from are fear, fraud, and fakeness. And so she wanted to be confident and make certain he knows that she's a confident woman on a very big stage, ready to have the discussion and the differences between the two candidates. And so it was smart for her as a prosecutor and as a candidate to introduce herself to the prosecutor and the policy pretender.
She was pressed, though, on changes in her policies, flip-flops in her policies. She says, my values haven't changed, but her position on fracking, assault buybacks, those have changed. She was challenged on how it was only, until 6 months before the election that her and President Biden issued executive order measures to deal with what's happening at the southern border. What do you think those damaged Kamala Harris? How do you think she handled those when the moderators pressed her on that?
I think she handled it well because she told the truth. And at the end of the day, one of the first pieces of legislation that the Biden-Harris administration pushed was legislation to create a safe and humane border, but also give them the resources to operate so that we can deal with this the legislative way and not executive order, which some argue would have been caught up in court. But because of the back and forth did not happen, they finally were able to get it done by way of executive order. And we've seen the results for consecutive months. Illegal border crossings are down. In fact, I think that they're lower than they were when the Trump presidency ended. And so no one can argue with that. And look, it's okay to evolve on the issues. Think about where the country was on reproductive freedom and gay marriage at one point in time, and think about where the country is now. So that's not anything new to the American political experiment. But what people cannot get their arms around is when you do not have a position at all, or when you're such a flip-flopper in real time, like the former president has been on reproductive freedom and reproductive justice. I think that's when people are bothered by a politician in the way they conduct themselves.
So Antoine, here we are. This is the second presidential candidate debate of this campaign, though with a different set of characters, with Kamala Harris replacing Joe Biden. A lot of Republicans are complaining about the moderator, saying they were too aggressive with former President Trump, not aggressive enough with Kamala Harris. He says he won. It was the best debate of his life. Kamala Harris says she wants a rematch. She's happy to have a second debate at any time. Donald Trump, not so sure, saying unless it goes to like Fox and Sean Hannity or someone like that as the moderator. Do you think we're going to see another debate between these two candidates?
Oh, I don't know. What we do know is she's prepared and ready to debate him again. I think all the details, of course, have to be ironed out, but she's willing to do that. I don't think people should forget we're going to also have a vice presidential debate hosted by CBS between now. But I think every day is a debate, because every time both of them step on any platform speaking directly to cameras or the American people one way or another, I think that that is a chance for people to hear the issues and hear the differences. So it may not be a moderated debate, who the hell knows, but the debate will take place over the next 50 some odd days. And I think Kamala Harris will continue to debate very well and win the day, which means winning the moment. Ultimately, hopefully that leads to winning the election.
Antoine C. Wright, a Democratic political strategist, much happier after this debate day than the last debate day. Always good to talk to you, man. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
Okay, an energized Democrat. We're going to turn now to the Republican camp and see how they're feeling on the other side of this campaign. Matt Terrell is the former chief of staff for Marco Rubio's 2016 presidential campaign and the managing partner at Firehouse Strategies. Matt, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us again.
Hey, great to be with you.
Donald Trump said this was my best debate ever. And then he said, especially since it was 3-on-1, taking a shot at the moderators. How do you think it went for the Republican nominee last night?
Well, certainly there were some missed opportunities by former President Trump. There's no question about that. But I'm not so sure that Vice President Harris, at least in my view, accomplished what she needed to accomplish last night as well. You know, look, what Vice President Harris needed to do was win over voters, particularly on key issues that are driving this election, namely the economy. If you look at the polling after the debate, you know, on the issue of the economy, the top issue is facing voters right now. Former President Trump actually increased his lead on that issue in comparison to where his number was at on that issue at the beginning of the debate. So look, the bottom line is that this debate mattered. There's no question. I honestly don't think that this debate's going to shift the race. You know, we have only a few weeks left in the race, but certainly I don't think this debate's going to really shift this race one way or the other.
We saw some commentary from people like, say, Frank Luntz, for example, does a lot of polling, you know, on voting behavior and on messaging. He said that Trump blew his chance to discuss his strongest issue, inflation, and instead amplified his most polarizing one, so 2020 election denial. You agree with that assessment? Is that the sort of thing the former president did wrong last night?
Well, again, I think there's some moments that were missed opportunities. There's no question. But at the same time, I think those who are watching this debate and were supporters of Vice President Harris thought that she did quite well and thought that she did what she needed to do. Those who are supporters of former President Trump looked at it and said, this is just Trump being Trump. And at the end of the day, he's authentic to who he is. Either people like that or not, or agree with that or not. But really, this election is going to come down to 45,000, maybe 100,000 voters at the end of the day. And what do they care about? Inflation, border security, the economy. That's what they're lasered in on right now. That's where their mindset is right now. And the question that they have isn't around, you know, style over a debate. It's about who has the capability to lead on those issues and who has a strong track record on those issues. And many would argue that former President Trump, in terms of the issues of inflation and the economy and border security, has a better track record than the Biden-Harris administration. So at the end of the day, this comes down to the issues. You know, those who are watching this debate last night, I think they were looking at these issues namely, and that's what they're going to vote on.
But you know, Matt, you go back to when it was Joe Biden against Donald Trump, right? Joe Biden's age, his mental fitness, his mental acuity. These were big things that voters were concerned about. We saw Donald Trump last night talking about, hordes of immigrants stealing family pets for food in Springfield, Ohio, which, the town government in Springfield said there's no evidence of this. He talked about the execution of babies. He talked about a lot of things that are just way out there in the conspiracy world of the internet and not real things. I mean, how do you think that sliver of undecided voters in the key swing states are going to look at things like that? Because those are the clips that are generating all of the attention out of this.
Well, look, former President Trump is not new to the political stage, and he has a certain style and approach to debates and a certain style and approach to campaign rallies and campaign in general. And so this would be one thing if he was new to the political process in terms of being new to the political stage. He's not. He's been on the stage for a number of years now. Voters either like him or they don't. But look, here's the deal. The Democrat base, they're going to turn out for Vice President Harris. He's not going to win over the Democrat base. The GOP base, they're going to turn out for former President Trump. This is going to come down to those low propensity voters or those independent and undecided voters. And I think they look at former President Trump and they say, you know what, I don't agree with every statement, I don't agree with every social media post, but on the issues of affordability, namely on housing, healthcare, food, and fuel, on the issue of border security, he's the candidate that many voters, I think, will look at and say, he's the person who can lead on this. But at the end of the day, it's up to former President Trump to win over those voters. Right. Endorsements at this stage aren't going to matter. It's up to the candidates to win over the voters.
So you don't think this has a meaningful effect on his campaign, the sort of erratic behavior you kind of saw on the stage last night? Because I've never seen him in debates be sort of on the defensive so much and so off message as he was last night.
Well, we've seen moments in the past. Go back to 2016, where it was the Access Hollywood tape, and people were pointing to that as being the end of his campaign. It wasn't. Go back to the impeachments and the court cases that have been taking place. Many were arguing that the court cases were going to knock him out of the GOP primary process, if you will. That didn't happen. Became the nominee. Back in 2016, he became the president, won that election. We'll see how this all takes shape. But again, I go back to he is who he is. Either voters like that or not. At the end of the day, I think voters are less concerned about personalities, or I should say less focused on personalities right now and style. And I got to be honest, I think they're laser focused on affordability, the economy, border security. That's what's driving this election. That's what this election will be decided on.
I have to say, his ability to defy the laws of political gravity are truly remarkable, in terms of what we've seen over the 8 years or 9 years now that he has been in elected politics in the United States. But I wonder, we saw right after the debate, I know there were a lot of celebrities like Kid Rock and Hulk Hogan at the Republican National Convention. We saw Taylor Swift weigh into this debate last night. And I know celebrity endorsements have limited value, but hundreds of thousands of people have gone through her webpage to register to vote. You said this election could be decided by 40, 50, 100,000. When you see this, these are new voters coming in, and they're clearly motivated by her as a conduit. They're probably going to be Kamala Harris voters. What do you think? Can that have any impact in this, do you think, Matt?
Well, I think many voters right now, particularly on the Democrat side, are just motivated, energized because it's anybody but President Biden. With all due respect to President Biden, who is not exactly a candidate that was energizing his political base and other voters. So, look, I think that's a part of this. But there's no question these endorsements are going to happen. They're going to take shape. I think at the end of the day, endorsements are not going to make or break this election. We've seen celebrity endorsements for decades in politics. And I hate to be repetitive here, but I got to be honest, this can be just a handful of voters that are going to decide this thing. We saw in 2020, it was like 40,000 voters, give or take. 2016, roughly 80,000 voters to decide these races. I think this is neck and neck right now. I think this election is going to come down to the wire. And to your point, though, you're going to see endorsements take shape here. But it's going to be these issues that decide it: affordability, the economy, border security. That's the name of the game here.
So right after the debate last night, Kamala Harris said, we're ready to do another one. Let's do it again. Trump's campaign has said, yeah, we'll do this one on the 25th, but he later said, oh, I'm not so sure. We got to see. I mean, do you think we're going to see another debate, or do you think this is the end of it and we just get J.D. Vance and Tim Walz coming up in October?
This is probably the last one, is what my gut tells me, but who knows? I mean, look, there could be maybe one or two more. Traditionally, you have about 3 debates or so on different issues, obviously. My gut tells me this is probably the last one, and then we'll have the vice presidential debate, but time will tell on that.
Yeah, not a traditional campaign, man, I wouldn't say. And predicting what happens in American politics these days, good luck with that. But look, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. That's Republican strategist Matt Terrell. Thanks so much, man. So how did last night stack up against past U.S. presidential debates? Alan Schroeder is the author of Presidential Debates, Risky Business on the Campaign Trail. He's also a professor emeritus at Northeastern University School of Journalism, and he joins us again today. Professor, I don't know if you got a new chapter out of that debate last night to add on to your book. I mean, you said this was Harris's chance to do what Kennedy and Reagan did, to show themselves as a plausible presidential candidate. Sure seems like she did that in contrast to Donald Trump last night. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely, she did that. She had that test that she had to pass, and she passed it with flying colors. You know, it's unusual in debates to have a real clear winner and a real clear loser. Generally, it's a little murky to try to call those things. But this one is, you know, about as black and white as it gets.
I have obviously not studied presidential debates to the degree to which you have. I have watched a lot of them in my lifetime and a lot of debates here in Canada. I have never seen one as lopsided as the one we saw last night. She mopped the floor with Donald Trump. It seemed to me Vice President Harris did. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, she sure did. And, you know, I think it's a testament to the value of preparation. You know, Trump really did not prepare. They kept talking about they were doing policy sessions with him. Well, if they did, that wasn't manifested in the debate. Whereas Harris worked, you know, very hard. She spent several days doing nothing but debate prep, including full-scale mock debates. And it showed, you know, she did not go in there just to have a good time. She went in there with a purpose, a mission, and she accomplished.
I know when we chatted yesterday, we kind of agreed it would not be as significant as the Biden-Trump debate, which knocked Joe Biden out of the race and set the stage for what we saw last night. But this feels like a pretty significant debate, like two in a row that will be consequential, but this one seemingly going the other way. I mean, how do you set this in this campaign and compare it to the other elections you studied over the decades?
Well, it's always difficult to draw a conclusion from a debate about how the election might go. You know, this is still a very 50-50 polarized country. And if you remember back in 2016, Hillary Clinton had 3 debates with Donald Trump. She won all 3 of them by the exit polls or the post-debate polls, and yet she did not win the election. And the other thing I think is, you know, there's a lot of time between now and election day, and even though early voting starts here in a week or two in some states, there's time for people to forget what this debate was all about and what came down. So I'm not sure the Harris campaign can assume that that good performance will translate into votes or certainly translate into a win at the ballot box.
I appreciate your point that in the time that is left, people can forget. It's all, you know, people have kind of forgotten that someone took a shot at Donald Trump in Pennsylvania. You know, they've moved on because things move. But last night, the former president talked about migrants in Springfield, Ohio, eating cats and dogs. He talked about states killing babies after they were born, talked about sex changes for illegal aliens in prison, cited Hungarian strongman Viktor Orban as a character reference, wouldn't say he wanted Ukraine to win the war, and said he didn't talk to J.D. Vance about a national abortion ban. There's a lot of stuff there. I mean, have you ever seen, sort of content-wise, anything like that in the debates you've studied?
No, I think this is a pretty clear case of someone getting high on his own supply. You know, he's on Truth Social, he's on Fox News, he's on Newsmax, but he doesn't really engage in the broader traditional mainstream media that much. And so I think, you know, to him, all of that made perfect sense, because if you tune into those platforms, that's what they're talking about. But for the general audience, I just don't see how he did himself any favors, particularly with those undecided, persuadable voters.
There was that moment where she seemed to bait him when she looked at the camera and said, I invite you to attend a Donald Trump rally, because you will see people leaving out of exhaustion and boredom. And she talked about the size of the rallies not being as big as he likes to say, and that set him off. And he seemed to be completely and utterly derailed from that point on. I mean, it was an effective tactical move by the vice president, it seems.
Yes, it sure was. And I agree that he never regained his footing after that. And, you know, the way she set that up was masterful. She sort of leaned into the camera. I'm going to say something that you might not expect me to say. And so, you know, watching at home, I'm on the edge of the sofa here, just like, what's she going to do? But his reaction, and I've seen a lot of sort of meme versions of that today online, was just devastating. You could see that, you know, that she had really hit the target there.
So the consensus, certainly, look, in punditry and a lot of the political operatives here, and that is that the vice president won this debate. But, you know, it wasn't a flawless performance. So when you look at Kamala Harris, you know, they tried to go after her on the border. They tried to go after her on inflation, on the cost of living, that she's been there for 3.5 years and hasn't done some of the things she's now promising to do as the presidential candidate. Do you think Trump was able to help himself in any way with this performance and harm Vice President Harris by pointing out these things that the Republicans say are her weaknesses?
Not much, although I think a more effective debater could have, because, you know, these are some vulnerabilities for her, and she wasn't always giving the crispest answers to these kinds of questions. But it takes a prepared debater to come up against her with the facts and the history and the knowledge of her record and Biden's record to be able to pull that off. And, you know, by not preparing, by just showing up and saying whatever popped into his head, Trump really lost a huge opportunity in front of an enormous audience.
When it was all over, he went into what they call the spin room, which is where the surrogates are, and they're doing interviews with local and regional and national media, you know, making the case for why their candidate won. And typically you don't see the presidential candidate go in there. And when they do, it's often seen as a sign that they know they had a rough night. Trump went in. He went into the spin room himself last night while Vice President Harris, I believe, went to a rally and issued a statement saying, hey, we're ready to have another debate if Donald Trump is ready to have another debate. What do you make of those two reactions from the campaigns? That Trump felt the need to go himself, and she said, let's do this again.
Right. I was kind of surprised, actually, that she wants to do it again, because I figured, you know, she might as well quit while she's ahead on that. But I think it has to do with the calendar, the fact that, as we were talking about before, a September debate gives people time to forget what happened there. I thought his going into the spin room was just a little bit on the bizarre side, and it was not lost on the audience, I think, that he headed straight over to Sean Hannity from Fox News and went to his safe place and was really, I think, looking just for some reassurance more than trying to, you know, argue the case again.
It's interesting because, you know, as we talked yesterday, and others have been saying that, you know, Vice President Harris needed to show the country she was presidential material. I think she also went into there last night trying to completely disqualify Donald Trump by sort of this goading him in to reveal his age, his narcissism, and his various policy failures. She drew all of his worst qualities out on that stage, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. And furthermore, she made the point that the country's tired of it.
Yeah.
You know, that there comes a point where we're just exhausted by someone like Donald Trump. And it's a very good question. Do you really want that for another 4 years? So I thought she had that plan in mind. She executed it, and she was able to, you know, succeed more than I ever even would have anticipated. And I think that it was a surprise to a lot of voters as well.
It was an interesting way, I think, Professor, as a final point, for someone who is a member of the incumbent team in the White House to seize the mantle of change by talking about turn the page. And we're not going back to this. Let's move on. I'm a new generation. Let's go in a new direction. And that was an interesting strategic move by Kamala Harris.
Yeah, and she still does have that novelty factor of not having been the nominee for all that long. You know, if this was a traditional campaign, she would have been out there for the past 2 years, and people would, you know, have probably arrived at a different conclusion about her than they do as they just get to know her. So I think she recognized that, and she seized that moment, and she really did very well in further introducing herself to the electorate.
Alan Schroeder, author of Presidential Debates, Risky Business on the Campaign Trail. It's been good to talk to you this week. Thanks for joining us again today.
Thank you.